Okay. I want to. So, with respect to your being a chemist, right?
Yeah,
Like, and you
yeah, yeah,
said,
yeah.
I remember you said that 99% of people just stay in the, in the lab, um, and they don't like basically like go out and explore because of so many reasons, like you mentioned in the story, in your story. But so how can those people get out and do stuff, and like how can they make the most out of it, the craft that they have? They're so smart, they're
Yeah,
so they're an artist in a sense, right? And how can they take
absolutely.
take that art and like kind of go out and yeah.
Totally. And so what's beautiful about a lot of modern science, I'm going to say particularly biotechnology, is that there's been a lot of decreasing costs in terms of there's more labs that are opening up that allow you to work in like it's co-working or co-shared lab space, being able to run computational models to figure out if what you're going to do, if like a protein that you're targeting will make sense for a certain drug application, or even just like if you have an idea for how to edit the genes of yeast, you can submit those edits to a company who will do all of that lab work for you. So there's more infrastructure nowadays for you to do like high level science work without actually owning or being in a university. So that's the first piece. But the second piece I would say is it needs to come from inside, right? If you don't feel like what you're working on is going to be game changing, is going to really make a difference, and that you, the expert, because typically the scientists that are doing their own research, they're like one of five people or one of one person in the world that's focusing on this axis. If you think the thing that you're working on is important enough, then you should learn how to get it out there. And the easiest way to do that is just to talk to more people. But like we as scientists are trained to write very highly technical papers that are only written or only decodable by other people in science. And that's very difficult for the modern person to understand. But you could like inspire, kids to be scientists, that if you explained it to them in ways that they could understand, you would kind of pass the torch on to the next generation. And then the most important, which I've seen so much happen in undergraduate, and I know so many PhDs and master students that are in this position, but if you don't love what you're doing, you don't love what you're studying, and you don't love what you're researching, just change it.
Right.
There are so many meaningful problems in the world that need to get solved, so many advances that are happening. Like, just take the 3 months, 6 months off, take a sabbatical, what have you, and explore what's naturally interesting and curious to you. And then you'll find what the most important problems are to solve there. And a quick hat tip to Sam Altman. He says that you should be asking, what is the most important problem in my industry that I can possibly solve?
Right.
And I think if more scientists did that, we'd have more breakthroughs in really important areas of science, like fusion technology, as an example, which would totally make all fossil fuels irrelevant. So if you don't do it necessarily, like if you're not trying to optimize your science for meaning or for leverage or to benefit the greater good, I would ask, like, why are you being a scientist? And if it's to solve complex problems, I'm telling you, you're going to get a great kick out of solving a complex problem that also will add an important leaf to it, a very important tree of knowledge, rather than something that's kind of like esoteric and niche and maybe not so important. So pick meaningful research for one thing, and also tell people about it, right? Especially young kids who are still in their formative years, who have the opportunity to dream and who want to think about the future in the way that you are as a scientist, and who might find inspiration in what you're doing and want to carry that torch of being a scientist, of being a researcher themselves.
Right. But I also remember you said something about like, a lot of people, a lot of scientists keep the science in the lab and not take it to the real
Yes,
world, right?
for sure.
How can people do more of that? I remember you mentioned something about Peter Thiel talking about this concept as well, or something along the lines.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So it's easy to point to that statistic and say, look, like there's 99.9% of inventions or innovations just like don't leave academia. Um, and like part of the way you would get some of that to happen is by being a little bit more vocal about what you're developing. But some of the other part would actually just to say, fuck it, this is important enough, like let me try to commercialize it myself, like let me
Right.
let me actually make this real. And the cost of failure is actually very, very low, um, if you have expertise in a space, if you have the desire and the drive to see what you're doing hit the real world. So again, I'd argue that if researchers are really passionate about the problem that they're solving, you shouldn't just say, okay, like once I've written a paper, this is it, or like, oh, I'm just gonna like let it toil in the lab, because your work isn't going to mean anything unless it's brought out of the lab. So look for other companies that you might be able to partner with that could take your innovation from a lab space and actually commercialize it. Or if you're in the space of biochemistry or biotechnology, there's so many pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies that you could talk to and say like, hey, look, here's the line of research that I'm doing. Like, how can we do this research better so that way you could license it, or that you could take it from our lab and actually move it out into the real world. And granted, the biotechnology company will take most of the expenses and so on and so forth. But so long as you align yourself and you know that the goal is to make something useful, you can talk to these other players. You can do this other research. You can be more vocal. You can pick more meaningful science. And then once it's done, you can like email and contact and reach out to individuals who you think could benefit. And even if they can't, they might know someone who will. And so at the end of the day, it's up to you to see that it actually makes a meaningful impact on society. But if you're researching it in the first place, you believe in what you're doing. So wield that self-belief and let it fuel you, let it take you to that next level.
Love it, man. That's awesome.